military life can be rough, and so can life outside the military. And it's like the great philosopher Forrest Gump once said, life is like an ambush. You never know what's going to blow up next. We all have these explosions in our lives. We all have these ambushes that take place, whether it's in our relationships, whether it's in our jobs, in our careers. Maybe it's a difficult customer. You're trying to maintain your business. Maybe you lost a loved one. Maybe you had a friendship just die or some sort of relationship ended. We all face setbacks. And one thing I don't want you to ever think is that just because you hear of one other person's setback and how bad it seems, that you underestimate what you've been through yourself. I meet a lot of people who find out about my military experience and they say things like, well, Brian, I've been through this or that, which is like this awful thing I would never wish on anybody. But then they say things like, but I didn't go through what you went through. And as people, we tend to downplay our own experiences, but the danger in doing that is that there's a lot of assets and things that we can learn from in our own life experience that can not only help us, but it can help other people. And so today I want to talk to you about a few key things that the world's most resilient people all have in common. Over the past 10 years since coming home from Afghanistan, by the way, I realized I'm wearing the same thing in that picture as I'm wearing today. I just happened to look over and go, this guy doesn't get out much. Seriously. But, so we all go through these things, but I found that sometimes you can have two people go through the same exact situation, and one person bounces back, they fight forward, and they're able to move beyond it, and sometimes the other person just sort of struggles, and sometimes never gets their footing. I see this a lot in the military with all the resilience training I do for the military, and you can have one or two people get into an explosion or a gunfight in Iraq or Afghanistan, and one comes home and they move forward productively, the marriage works out, they get a job, they move on in life, they're doing well. But his buddy just can't seem to get a footing. I started wondering, what is the actual difference between people who bounce back and are able to move beyond their challenges and those who are not? When I came home from Afghanistan, I was one of the people that was able to begin moving forward rather quickly beyond a really tough experience. And the first few years I was out speaking, people would ask me, how did you move forward? What was the one thing that made the difference? It's always that one thing question. And the first few years, I didn't have an answer. And it really bothered me because I realized that though people were inspired by the fact that I survived what I did, I really didn't have anything to give them that was practical, that they could apply to their life so they could win the battle that they're fighting right now, or that a loved one of theirs is fighting. And so that really bothered me. And so it's been about 10 years, 11 years now I've been home, and I've had the privilege of not only having my own perspective on tragedy, loss, challenges, but I also realize that my experience is not universal to everybody's situation. And so I'm also blessed with the fact that about my 12 closest friends are all extreme tragedy survivors of some sort, whether they're abuse survivors, burn survivors, amputees missing 1, 2, 3, or all of their limbs. Doesn't matter. They've been laid off, they've been through things. And the advantage I say that I've had in my life is that I've been able to learn from those types of people what actually worked to answer the hard questions that so often stop us up. And today I want to share 3 of the big things that I found that the world's most resilient people tend to have in common. As you know, we live in a very turbulent economy. The world is very unstable. I'm not one of the motivational speakers who's going to stand up here and say, if you do everything I say, your life's going to be good. I'm the guy who tells you things are going to blow up. If you're not going through something bad now, unfortunately, bad things are going to happen in life. That's not even a question. It's more about how prepped you are and how you respond to those things when they do come into your life. And some of you are thinking, this guy is definitely not a motivational speaker. Life's going to be bad. No, they don't have to be bad. But that's the narrative, the story of life is that we have people who are trying to get somewhere or do something, and there are struggles and enemies and ambushes along the way. And right now, unfortunately, we're living in a society that is breeding to a younger generation the message that if life is tough, you must have done something wrong, or that something isn't right, or for some reason you're a victim and that there's some oppressive thing that's coming against you. And when the truth really is that does happen in some senses, but overall it's just the story of life. And so to live our lives according to any other narrative except we want something and there's a struggle and we need to get better at overcoming the struggle and getting through it, any other narrative than that is really just self-deceiving, because that's the way life is. I served with the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division while fighting the war in Afghanistan, and this was in 2006. While I was there, I was inside 2 vehicles that were blown up and totally destroyed while I was inside it with my guys. This was the first one. This was on April 18th of 2006. But then a couple months later, I was in the front seat of the truck, the lead vehicle of about a 15-vehicle convoy, when a white minivan pulled up next to my door. And didn't think anything of it. And he got in front of us, so we pulled up on his left, and we were passing him, pulling right up next to him on his left to pass him. And it was being driven by a suicide bomber. And he blew his minivan into about 10,000 pieces that day. And that's my door blasted open right there. I woke up on the ground over here. I really didn't know what had happened. My first thought was, why would I go to sleep here? It's kind of funny now, but in the moment, I truly didn't realize or remember that I was laying down. I thought maybe we were in a gunfight, and I don't know why I don't remember laying down here. I happened to be lucky enough to wake up on the side of the road that day. There's nothing in me. Thank you. There's nothing in me that had anything to do with that. I could have just as easily not woken up. This is me about a day and a half later in Germany. You can see the white on my chin. Kind of puts it in perspective. That was my normal skin color because I was burned in the face 2nd degree. It took the top layer off. Both my hands were 3rd degree. That was my left hand. Skin grafts. They got into Brooke Army Medical Center, and the doctor told me, he said, hey, we're going to have to do skin grafts. I'm like, all right, what's that? He said, well, basically, we're going to take skin from your rear end, and we're going to put it on your hands and your face. And I'm like, all right, that's interesting. But you can't take this and put it on this. That's like cruel and unusual punishment. I'm like, I got blown up. That's kind of bad enough already. And he said, well, we'll give you 2 days to see if your face heals, and if it doesn't, we're putting the skin on it. Fortunately, my face began healing up. My hands, not so much. They were full thickness, 3rd degree burns on top. So they did skin grafts. Now, if you shook my hand today, don't worry, that's not where they took the skin from. You haven't been assaulted. It's not weird. All right. They actually took it from the front of my thighs, which is a little less weird. You know, you touch the top of my hand, you're kind of touching my leg. Not really. My wife teases me, though. She's like, oh, yeah, look, you have leg hair on your hands. Like, well, if that's the worst thing I'll walk away with from a suicide attack, I'm doing pretty good. If you get blown up or shot or injured in combat by the enemy, they give you this award that nobody wants called the Purple Heart. I call it the Enemy Marksmanship Badge. My other buddy who got shot 12 times, he calls it the Slow Mover Award. Yeah, Navy SEAL humor there for him. But they give you a license plate with a Purple Heart on it if you get a Purple Heart. And so I thought, I want to have some fun with this, because the suicide bomber was the only guy who died. So, like, what could I put on that license plate? Well, I decided to put nice try. And so that's kind of my way. That's kind of my way of dealing with it. You'll learn as you go through different bad experiences in life that we all have certain coping mechanisms. When you are in the worst situation you've ever been in, or an extreme place of pain, you have to have some sort of outlet. And for me, I just found that humor and sarcasm was sort of it. But the first thing I found that they have in common is that they have a strong sense of meaning in their suffering. Something that really helped me out was I learned about a guy named Viktor Frankl. How many of you heard of Viktor Frankl? Anybody? A few of you. Well, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jew, a psychiatrist, who was taken to the Nazi prison camps during World War II, and his whole family was killed. He happened to survive. And when he talked about the topic of suffering after he was liberated by the Americans, he came to America, lived a very productive life. He said this. He said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. I didn't really understand that at first, and when people would ask me how I moved forward, I didn't know what to tell them, but that's exactly what it was. Because about 6 months after my injury, one of my good friends, who's now one of my mentors, he put me up on a stage in Kansas while I was wrapped up in burn bandages. He pulled me up on stage at his talk. I was sitting right in the front row, and there were about 3,000 people there that day. And I was wrapped up, I was burned up, and I said, hey, I'm Brian, I got blown up. I guess I'm still here for a reason. Go for it. Got to be motivational, right? And so that didn't change my life. What happened when I got off stage changed my life. A young lady walked up to me. She was probably 22 at the time, about my age. And she said, hey, I've been raped and abused and, growing up and all this horrible stuff. My boyfriend abused me. I tried killing myself and I failed. And I'm thinking to myself, sorry? I don't know why she's telling me this. It's horrible. But then she said this. Remember, I was asking the right question. What can I do with this? That was my perspective. At the end of that, what she had told me, she said, but if you can get through all this, if you can make it through this, she said, I think I can make it through what I'm going through. Now, that might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people. But when you're going through the worst, most painful experience you've ever had in your life, and suddenly somebody else is not going to go home and shoot themselves because they saw that you made it, maybe they can too, that was the sense of meaning I was looking for. I was open to it, and because of that fact, I found it. You can see this in anybody you look at, whether it's Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Joan of Arc, these historical figures, who are basically killed for their cause. These are people who were very strongly tied to a reason for what they were going through. They believed that the struggle was for a reason. And when it comes to meaning, what you're really tapping into is a belief system. And we all have different belief systems, but here's the thing. When we ask that question of why, it has to do with our beliefs. And one thing that a lot of people overlook is that what we believe about our situation is never a matter of our abilities. Belief is always a matter of the will. So simply put, we believe what we do because we choose to. It's not that we lack the ability to believe differently. It's that we choose to believe one thing over another about our situation. Perspective is the bridge between where you are and the place you're trying to go. Because that's why you can have two people go through the same thing, yet they end up in two very different destinations. That has a lot to do with perspective as well as some other things. The second thing they have in common is they have mentors. People in their life, I kind of hit on this already, they have mentors, people who can help them move forward. It's like the military. There's a reason we have a chain of command in the military, because it works, at least for the purposes we have. And a chain of command is basically you have somebody above you, you have somebody beside you, and you have somebody below you. As a sergeant, I had staff sergeants and other enlisted and officers who were above me. Their task was to lead me, to train me, so I could become a better leader and help win the battles that we were fighting. But I also had people of equal rank next to me, and we were doing this journey together in the military. I could help them, they could help me. We're growing together. But then I had guys who were under me of lesser rank, and my job was to do for them what the superiors were doing for me, and that's to train them up. And one of the great things about having that is that when you have somebody underneath you that you're training up, you get a huge sense of contribution in life and fulfillment. People have a lot of ideas about what fulfills us. I hear a lot of people say, if you want to be fulfilled, just look within. Personally, I don't look within because I don't find fulfillment there, because I'm more aware of my flaws and the things that I am that are not good in my opinion than anybody else knows. I've never found more fulfillment in anything than when I'm able to help somebody else come up to a level I'm at or beyond, being able to mentor somebody along. And so when you think about the struggles you're facing, maybe in your business, think about, well, who can be a source of solution for the problem I'm having? It's basically pick the problem and then, okay, who can help me solve this? And the last thing is a mission. People who tend to overcome these massive challenges that they face, you'll find that they have a mission that they're living for that's greater than themselves. It's something that transcends them. It's something that transcends personal gain or recognition. And the important thing about it is that this is an action piece. This is proof of the meaning. When you think about the people who, throughout history and people who have endured suffering, you get people who won't take back what they said because they truly meant it and they're standing for a cause they're basically, in an extreme case, willing to die for. Those are people who believe in something deeply and it guides their actions. When you think about it, there are a lot of things in life that can cause a downward spiral. Think about somebody who maybe, they did something, they made a mistake, and they didn't quite recoup from it. And so now it seems like they make one bad decision to the other, and it seems like the downward spiral just never ends, the domino effect. Well, you'll see with a lot of people who are able to come back from these things, they have the sense of meaning in their suffering. That gives them the fuel to keep moving forward. They have mentors in their lives. That's the guidance to move forward, knowing what to do to move forward. And the mission is something that is really transcendent. And I'm not getting overly spiritual by saying the word transcendent. I'm being literal. There's something they care about more than what they actually do that they're serving that cause for. Those types of people don't tend to fall off track. Yeah, they face challenges, but they don't tend to be the ones that never get up again and they're done. And so I want you to think about these things in your own personal life, because these things, these little things can make one guy said one time, small hinges swing big doors. It's the little details that make all the difference in our lives, and it can either throw us off track or it can keep us on track. When you're going through a hard time or a challenge, you don't see the value in it. Nobody wants to go through it, but you don't see the value in it when you're in it because it's like the fog of war. You're too close to it. But after you get through it, you can actually look back and have some hindsight, and you can say, hey, this is what came out of it. And a lot of times it's better than where you were going. My roommate was killed in Iraq a couple of years after my injury, and their unit was ambushed. He ran out into the street, into the gunfire to get his buddy who was wounded to drag him back to safety. They were both killed that day. And so that's literally how he died. And it's interesting, though, because in 2013, just after this came out, I was speaking in Palm Springs, California for a big military fundraiser, and I had these books with me. And this lady walks up to me after the talk. Little white-haired lady, blonde-haired lady. Don't tell her I said white. And she says, hey, Brian, my roommate's name was Cody. And she said, hey, Brian, I see that you dedicated this book to Cody. I'm Cody's mother. Yeah. And I'm like, wow. You don't say. And it turns out, well, Cody was her only son, her only kid. And after talking to her, she said, Brian, my greatest fear is that who Cody was and what he did will be forgotten. That's her greatest fear. And I told her, well, as long as this book's in production, and it will be beyond you and me both, it'll outlive us. I said, your son's story will always be told. And I can't tell you what it meant to me to know that I could help minimize a fear that a Gold Star mother had about her son dying and being forgotten. And it all came from a suicide attack that just about killed me. I didn't see any of this stuff when I woke up in that ditch in Kandahar. I didn't see much purpose in it. I couldn't. And I want you to think about that today. I know this is kind of an extreme story, but like I said in the beginning, don't look at my story and say, well, that's an extreme case for Brian and my stuff isn't that bad. I would rather get blown up again than go through some of the stuff that some of you have been through. I hear stories, and there are things I would never, ever want to go through or wish on anybody, but there's value in that. I think that, everyone wants to forget their pain, but I think it would be tragic to forget our pain because that's where some of the greatest lessons and some of the greatest value that we can give to the world comes from. This stuff works. It's worked for a lot of people. I've had the privilege of speaking to over 500,000 people over the past 10 years, and people have applied some of this stuff to their lives. And my hope for you is that you'll be able to apply it to your life. Not all of it, just the next step, so that you can take your next step forward